Välkomna till detta andra seminarium i Spelalmedalen som vi arrangerar här idag. Det här seminariet kommer ske på engelska, men jag kommer börja dra en kort intro på svenska och sedan så vill man ställa frågor på svenska går det jättebra. Så översätter vi och håller på. Det är mycket begrepp. Det kan vara så att vi inte kommer på de rätta begreppen på engelska. Då får vi vara lite svengelska i detta. Nödutgångar där och vid återsamling vid muren. Inte i trädgården, vid muren. Väldigt viktigt. So, I'm about to start this second panel here for Spelalmedalen. We are speaking English today, thanks to our prominent guest, Anselm Rodenhausen from Germany, but you're based in Brussels, and you also have a Swedish connection, which is, we're really happy because that made it possible for you to come here.
Jag vill inte tala svenska, men jag vill lära mig. Thanks a lot for doing this in English for me. So my wife is half Swedish, but from Skellefteå, so far away. So I have an incentive to learn Swedish.
But we're very happy about that. So in 10 years, when you come back, we will do this fluently in Swedish as well. Unfortunately, we had one guest today, Fredrik Wester, who wasn't able to make it to the island because he was going in a boat and it was too windy and wavy. So he's stuck back in Stockholm, which I think he's quite sorry for, and we're also sorry for that. But I'm very, very sure that we will have a really interesting panel here today, talking about all the regulations and development in Europe. And also, except from Anselm from Video Games Europe, we have Jana Nykänen. You are CEO of Divine Robot, a VR serious games company, and also doctor. I like the fact that we have two doctors. Marcus Toftedal, who is working for the Science Park in Skövde with various projects. Yes. And you will have some time to introduce yourselves a bit better. But Anselm, I would like to start with you. What is the current issues for the games industry in Europe in general?
Thanks, Johanna, and first of all, thanks for having me here. Very happy to be here in Visby, my first time on Gotland. I come from Brussels, and indeed, in one sentence, what's going on in Brussels? A lot. Yeah, so many things ongoing. Some of them are directly related to the video games industry. Other issues, other developments are targeting other sectors, but the video game industry finds itself as a kind of collateral damage, you could say. Before giving an overview, maybe a quick word on Video Games Europe, or may I ask you to raise your hands if you already know Video Games Europe, then I'll skip, okay, almost, then only very quickly. So we are the trade association on European level. We have various larger publishers that are direct members to us, so for example the Embracer Group, but we also have the national trade organizations which are members to us, so Dataspace Branchen is a member, and through this we are representing a large part of the video games industry in Europe. We are doing the classic things that you expect from a trade organization, so we are following all the developments in Brussels, all the new EU laws, or also the EU-based investigations that are affecting the video games industry. I'll talk about that in a second. And we are also helping companies to understand what's going on, what is the regulatory framework that is relevant for video games companies, because it's a lot. I will mention a few legislations, a few laws that you might have heard about, a few developments. And we are also organizing different formats, different series where we are helping companies to be compliant with these EU laws and helping them to understand what's going on. So what is going on EU level? In a nutshell, a lot is going on right now, but already for years. And best way to maybe picture it is if you compare the current mandate of the new Commission, of the European Commission, with the prior mandate. So both mandates were led by Ursula von der Leyen as Commission President. And the first Commission, the first mandate of von der Leyen, you could say was imprinted by the idea to have proper rules in Europe that address certain challenges that came from tech or big tech, so to say. So there were a number of really new, heavy laws that were made in the last 5 years. So you might have heard about the DSA, the Digital Services Act. You might have heard about the DMA, Digital Markets Act. Then there was the Data Act. Then recently there came the AI Act, addressing artificial intelligence. So these were kind of digital laws, but then you also had a lot in the environmental area, because the overall headline of the Commission was also the new Green Deal. So you had environmental laws such as the CID, the Corporate Responsibility Directive, or the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, so a lot of acronyms. And most of these were not made for video game companies. Yeah? So they made to address other companies, such as all the digital rules for the tech companies. But most of them are so broadly drafted, the scope is so broad, that they nevertheless have also an impact on creative sectors such as the video game industry. So to give an example, the DSA, Digital Services Act, yeah, it was not made for us, but still video game companies, if they fall under the provisions of being an intermediate service provider, and many do, yeah, they have to comply with these laws. And that's sometimes quite challenging because it's complex, and while the big companies of course have the resources to deal with that, it is a challenge, it is a burden in particular for SMEs. Yeah. So that was the last mandate. Now we have a new mandate, the von der Leyen II Commission mandate. And maybe best way to visualize this is that when the first heading of the first mandate was, regulate, now the heading is a bit like deregulate. I'm very cautious with describing it, but the idea is now to focus on topics such as competitiveness, realizing that Europe has a huge challenge to compete with other areas in the world, in particular the US or also China. And that goes along with the idea to have not come up with so many new laws, but rather to enforce existing laws, and maybe also to simplify things, so deregulation. At least that was the promise at the beginning. If we look at that in detail, is that actually happening? So are there no more new laws? You could say there are less, but there are still new laws coming. So 2 examples, the DFA, the Digital Fairness Act, that's another law in the pipeline that will for sure also affect video game companies, because we know that there's something called an impact assessment, yeah? So where they, as part of the legislative process, look at the things they want to deal with, and as part of that, video game companies or certain practices of the industry were mentioned. such as in-game currencies, loot boxes, the old story, but also techniques such as pay to win, pay to progress, dark patterns. So something will come that way. That's the Digital Fairness Act, DFA. Another example is the Digital Network Act, so DNA. So if you want to easily remember all the Brussels regulations, always an D and an A at the end. So Digital Act, and then in the middle you have either S like services, or M like markets, or F like fairness. Yeah? This is coming. A few new laws. Question is deregulation. Will it really get easier for companies, as the Commission has said? So there are things in the discussion to make things a bit easier, because the Commission has realized that it's time to really boost competitiveness, do something that this kind of jungle they have created with laws and laws and laws. I mean, even for us that we're dealing with that every day, it's really it's challenging sometimes to keep track. But what does that mean for companies? It's not their job, companies, to understand all of that. Companies have the job to provide good services and products and go on the market. Yeah? So it is a challenge. The Commission is realizing that, and to give an example, there will be a bit of deregulation or making things easier when it comes to the environmental things. So certain parts of these reporting obligations, such as the CSDDD or so, they will come later for certain companies. Funny thing is that will come through so-called omnibus directives. Yeah? So it's a new law. So you have the impression to, what does it take to cut the red tape? More red tape. Yeah? So that's another law. That's a bit the Brussels way. Third point that I mentioned under the new mandate is to enforce the existing laws in a consequent way. So that's certainly true for things like the DMA. You might have seen it in the news, how it is enforced against Apple, Google, other tech companies. And then another point is consumer law. So EU consumer law is now more and more enforced. And that brings me to one point where I can then later go a bit into detail, which is an action that is taking place right now by the CPC network. So that's the Consumer Protection Coordination Network on the topic of in-game currencies. So that's a huge thing, very relevant, quite threatening also, but before I go into the depths of that, maybe I pause here for a second.
Thank you. That's very, I think it was very well put and separated, and I think we will all come back home and thinking about how many acts EU can make, depending on how many letters we have in the alphabet.
There are also numbers, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it might have an end to it, or we can hope so at least. So a lot of these new regulations are really heading into also affecting the video. They are not made for the video games companies, but they are affecting the video games companies in the end anyway. How, Jana and Marcus, you're both working with, Jana, you have a smaller companies. Have you seen any direct effect of any of the regulations that Anselm has been talking to, or do you see that in the future as it is now?
You want to start, or?
I can't say I personally see a direct effect of it, but on the other hand, there are so many of them, so obviously at one point it will happen. Also, whether you're serving consumers or other corporate clients, they may be affected by it, so you're all kind of part of the whole ecosystem in a sense. But I mean, in terms of the EU wanting to increase competitiveness and innovation, it doesn't really sound or feel like it at this point. And I have a lot of other issues in terms of kind of regulation exists in Sweden, which is supposed to ease research and development for smaller companies, such as the tax deduction, FoU-avdraget, which is meant to be able to be used by small companies who are innovating and doing R&D. But it's so complicated to actually use it that many companies, including us, didn't use it for a very long time, because you basically need experts to do it. And even Skatteverket themselves need experts to interpret what is needed or not. So it's kind of, each party has to hire their own experts to be able to even take advantage of these deductions. So it's not really working, I think.
Yeah, I think that was a very good framing of what we are seeing as well. Working as a business coach, that's good that it was on my name tag as well. But I mean, we as an incubator have to help even the earliest startups with addressing these questions, since, I mean, as you all should know, that it's a global market. I mean, even though you are a startup, you're still acting on a global market and need to at least have knowledge on this. And it's super hard to start your own company. It's even harder to make it in a global business. And then also with all the regulation, it puts a lot of effort both for us as business developers, but also on the specific startups to do that. So what you said there, Anselm, with the regulations are not made for us, I cannot agree more. It's really the main feeling that there is a lot of things going on, but the specific things for the computer games industry is, it's really a mismatch there. So in one hand, we're supposed to foster innovative and technically advanced startups, but then on the other hand, you cannot do that because of the regulations. And it's on so many levels. Everything from the regulations when you release your game, but also trying to get funding or some kind of from different programs to start your company, then you always need to jump through some hoop. It's not only about making a good game company, but you also need to relate to some kind of deep tech or XR or something in the application that makes it impossible for us. So it's on so many levels. So it's really good that we have also the Video Game Europe that can address this on a European level. Little big question.
But so yeah, Anselm, do you think it would be, is there any chance of this getting better in the future, or what do you think we need to talk about on a national level to be able to change the framework in the EU?
Yes, I think there's always a chance that things get better. I mean, the thought that the regulators will completely stop doing laws, that is illusionary. I mean, that's their job, and they will always have some ideas. And to be fair, there are also certain legit targets and things that need to be addressed. The challenge is, or the aim should be to do that together in the dialogue with the legislators to really come up with a regulatory framework that has meaningful solutions for the consumers, meaningful solutions for other stakeholders, and does not stifle innovation, doesn't stifle the companies. And what I said earlier, it sounded a little bit that I was ranting against the EU and complaining that they come up with so many laws. And I think there is a valid point that it's really difficult. Companies are really are drowning within all these laws and regulation. However, I will now also say something positive about the EU, not only because in a prior life I worked for the Commission, but or maybe it's from there what I kind of see is that there can be even a positive effect of EU regulation for companies. That sounds like a big thesis, but I will explain. So if you are a startup in particular in a sector where you need to scale up very quickly to be successful, then you need to, of course, leave your home market after a while. And video games as a global industry maybe is a good example. And when you do that, if you scale up, then you're leaving your jurisdictions very, very quickly. And you need to be active on very jurisdictions. And in Europe, we already have the disadvantage compared to the US or to China that's, yeah, our market is very small, and after the border, different languages are spoken. That's already one handicap. Yeah? And if then, as an additional handicap, if you leave the border to another country in Europe, you have a completely different regulatory frame set, then it gets really complicated. So EU laws, even if they are not perfect, it might in some cases be better to have one unperfect law instead of having 25 unperfect laws to deal with, which are very, so this is where EU law can provide a chance also for companies if it sets a common, a harmonized framework, and a framework that, yeah, is not only harmonized but also has reasonable and meaningful solutions, and this is what we try to aim for.
And it's interesting, actually, you mentioned that they are now focusing on enforcing the laws, because I read somewhere recently, I can't remember if it was Roosevelt who said it, the best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it strictly, because then obviously the discrepancies will show up. And,
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there are positive things about this as well, and we see a lot of movements towards hopefully solutions with different kicks. For instance, EIT, the European Innovation Technology, have a specific focus on creative and cultural industries, and also the movements toward the new European Bauhaus, where I think it's a good match with the games industry that combines both arts and humanities into a very technical domain. So hopefully we will be able to lobby more against taking games as a not only, because that is also one of the difficulties that we face when talking regulations and with decision makers, that the games industry is still seen a little bit as something that you play with. Of course you do, but for children's, and it's about the maturity and the view on the medium itself. So slowly it goes towards something better is also the feeling, but there's a lot of hurdles to jump through.
Yeah. I think EU sometimes talk a lot about European champions as well, and to foster also the larger companies and everything here. Do you see, Jana, you got into a bit about the research and development deduction, the FoU-avdrag. Do you have anything else in, like, either on EU or national levels that you see as an obstacle right now in terms of regulations?
Well, if you consider the Swedish labor law regulation, well, that's an example where it could be good to have a standard EU law for labor, because it's supposed to be about free trade and labor across borders, because if we have a very strict labor market and other countries don't, then that means kind of unfair disadvantage to Sweden, because especially the games industry is in great need, is dependent on outside labor.
Marcus, do you have anything outside of the already mentioned topics here where you see, with either within the Science Park Skövde or with the smaller companies that you are coaching and working with, that is obstacles for them to go out in? Because your companies usually go, they're not catering to Sweden first.
No, and
really
that is one of
globally.
the both opportunities and challenges, of course, to have a global market from day one. That while the Swedish market is too small if you're aiming on a big. So we also see that we're very reliant on specific ecosystems, like Steam is the main platform that we are using. So we're also kind of vulnerable towards, well, the external factors, like US primarily companies having the necessary infrastructure in order to reach a market. And that is something that I think is being addressed, some kind of maybe not autonomy, but at least resilience against being too dependent on US and Chinese services. But that's also something that needs to be addressed from a video game perspective, I believe, because it's not the same, even though it could be the same mechanics behind it, but it's not the same specifics. Designing a European platform for selling games, for instance, well, that's a good dream, but then it's also the global market. So it's about how to navigate the different global initiatives and the infrastructure there is as well, some kind of guidance there. So that is one part of it. It's both the opportunity but also the challenge that it is a global business that we are in.
You said that we have both similarities but challenges within different markets. Sometimes, at least, I can feel that EU legislation in terms of the digital services in general are mostly aimed at social media. Anselm, do you see has EU in general starting to learn more about games, or do they still think about social media when they talk about platforms and regulations and what to restrict in terms of American larger companies and European smaller, because there are, of course, differences between the two?
There are huge differences. So what we're seeing, you asked, are EU legislators learning that there are differences? Yes and no. So yes, I think that they are seeing, okay, video games industry is not social media, it's something different, and they are coming up with ideas for specific regulation targeted at the video game industry. So there might be things in the Digital Fairness Act coming which are targeted directly at us, not as social media. So that's the legislator is kind of learning the differentiation is not always a positive thing. Yeah? Maybe I can use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about this specific focus on in-game currency.
Yes.
Or
also just want to say that we will soon open up to questions, so think about that. And then, yeah.
Okay. I try to be brief, but it's a big topic. So what we're talking about is that the CPC network is targeting a specific business model in the video game industry, and it's in-game currencies. So maybe I start at the beginning. So the CPC network, it's the Consumer Protection Coordination Network. It's the sum of the national consumer law agencies. So in Sweden, I had to look that up. So in Sweden, it's Konsumentverket. Yeah? And they have this network because the enforcement of consumer law, also EU consumer law, is the responsibility of the national organization. But to kind of do something on EU-wide level, harmonized, they have the CPC network. And in the CPC network, the EU Commission only has a coordinating role. Yeah? But the CPC network has certain powers. They can investigate, they can enforce. So you might have heard about the enforcement action against Star Stable Entertainment. That was done with by the CPC network. And these enforcement powers, they are written in the law. There is a CPC directive, it's granted. What isn't in there is that what they are doing right now, because they came up with a new idea, which they called key principles. So they have put a list where they are saying, okay, these are the principles that we think are the minimum legal requirements that the industry should adhere to be compliant with EU consumer protection law. At the same time, however, they are saying this is only our interpretation, so we can't legally go against these key principles themselves, which makes it very tricky. And these key principles, it's 7, and they cover things like, first principles, price transparency. Price transparency would mean that every time an in-game currency is exchanged within the game, so let's say I'm exchanging 100 gold coins in a fantasy game against a magic sword, then at that point in time within gameplay, the real fiat currency, so euro or Swedish krona, should be displayed with all the problems that brings. Then the other principles are about practices that should not obscure the real values, so having several levels of in-game currency. Then third principle, that consumers should not be forced to buy more in-game currency that they actually need or want. Then there has to be a clear pre-contractual information. Then the right to withdraw has to be respected, also with regards to in-game currency. And then there need to be fair and clear terms. That's the 6 principles. And the last one is that the design has to be in a way that it's not exploiting vulnerabilities of consumers. So in theory, the principles, they sound that they have a legit reason, and they do. But it's the how it is done that goes in a way that it's a real threat to this business model overall. So maybe that requires a short explanation. So it's not only that the idea of key principle is new, but it's also the underlying legal interpretation of the CPC network that is completely new. So what are they saying? They are saying in-game currencies would be a digital representation of value. We, the industry, Video Games Europe, and also our member companies, we are saying no. In-game currencies, it might have the name currency in it, but that is not what it is. It's digital content. It's part of the gameplay. And it's also a closed loop. So once you have bought it, you cannot exchange it back for money. Yeah? And this disagreement that we're having around the legal interpretation is not a theoretical, legalistic thing, but it has a concrete results to which laws will apply to in-game currencies. So I don't have a slide, so I will use my hand to explain that a bit better. So let's say my hand is the gameplay, yeah, and everything that happens within the game. So far, what happens is if you as a consumer decide on your own, okay, I'm willing to spend in-game currency because I want to have more of the game and use that in the game, I go to a shop that is outside the actual gameplay. And in that shop, I'm buying the in-game currency, this digital content as we call it, with fiat currency. Yeah? And this is where the commercial transaction takes place and where the contract takes place and nowhere else. That's the current system. And we not only saying that this is the practice, like how all the video game companies are doing it, have doing it forever in practice, but we also have case law, which is clearly showing that this is the way to do. However, the CPC network has come up with a different interpretation, ignoring all of that, also in contrast to existing case law, and saying, yeah, you have a contract there, but every time you're exchanging the in-game currency within the gameplay, you also have a contract, a commercial transaction. So let's say you buy 100 gold coins, you buy a magic sword here, then you buy the shield, here contract, here contract, here the contract, here
and then
contract.
You should be able to claim a refund for that sword if
Absolutely.
You can't kill the boss on that level. You know,
Absolutely.
That's,
that's a good example because it shows what kind of problems this new interpretation brings and that it is not really thought through by the CPC network. So we have explained that to the CPC network in various meetings now, also to the Commission, to DG Just, to DG Connect, to other parts of the Commission. We're continuing that and we are continuing to show that it not only brings a huge problem and a huge impact for the industry in applying that, but it's also in the end not very good for the consumer. So playing the game. So imagine you play, no? And then you buy the magic sword, and it's not that you just buy it, but then you have to scroll down something, read all the legal information, click on the consent. Then you will say, oh, the sword is not working and I need a magic wand. You're buying the magic wand, okay, you need to scroll down again, click on consent. So you might remember this consent fatigue that consumers had with the GDPR. And we are saying what the CPC network is proposing here will be a consent fatigue on steroids. So really, really strong. And we're continuing to make that argument. We are also in dialogue with the CPC to find a meaningful solution which addresses the legit purpose of having an informed consumer at the end, because that is clear. Consumers need to be informed. They need to make informed decisions, but it's the how to do it. And there we think what the CPC is doing is going into the wrong direction.
And as a parent, it's also good to have the purchase outside of the game, because then it's much easier to control and be aware of, because if it's both a purchase there and inside of the game, it will be much more messy for the kid to understand how and where and how to control everything.
Absolutely.
But is this also related to some kind of maybe not fear, but a notion that you can also bring out value from digital goods? Is that the reason that this has come up on the table at all, or is it only because of information purpose?
Our impression is that the CPC network was trying to find a way to already put certain obligations now under the existing law. This is why they kind of did this artificial trick, this new interpretation to say there are contracts everywhere. But it doesn't make sense, and it's also in contrast to the law.
Yeah, and I mean, when we heard about this interpretation of the law, we don't have very many companies or teams that use that kind of business models, but we would really not encourage any future ones to do it either, since you're getting trapped in this.
And what about accountancy then? If that magical sword has a real monetary value, will that have to be on your balance sheet? Or I mean,
it creates a lot of kind of follow-up issues and problems that they haven't seen, or we think they haven't seen that. And this is why part of what we're doing is raising awareness and telling that to everyone here. What they are proposing is not a few additional rules here and there, but it's a kind of, they're changing the game. They're changing the rules of the game where the contract is, with potential huge consequences, at least for that business model of in-game currency.
Do we have any questions from the audience from there?
Yeah, I was thinking to follow up on that, because in some games you also earn something when you do missions and so on. Should that be then, like, you earned 3 kroner doing this, it will also destroy the whole experience of the game, because you will all the time see this kind of real world thing. So it's not just
you want to extract them.
Yeah.
You want to withdraw them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, to spend them in the real world. Perfect.
Yeah, because then you get that feeling that is actually monetary value. So
and is the game the employer then paying employer
exactly.
taxes?
You need to tax it.
Yeah.
To very good points. I mean, the key principles, they say at the beginning, these principles only apply to earned in-game currency. Only to bought in-game currency, not to earned. However, it's not that easy in practice. What do you do if a game provides for both, if you have mixed things? And what you just said, that it creates this impression for people, okay, what I'm doing here creates value and creates the expectation what I have done here, that I collected in the mountains some ore or so, that this is a real value. It rather confuses the consumer than actually provides transparency.
It feels like it would be either counterproductive, or if you also can show that you earn money through the game, I mean related to screen time and that kind of discussion, that it's not just pastime, I earned money here. So so it like it grows on the connection, since it's such a nested question.
And if you have elements of chance in that, is also
Yeah,
there's a risk of being connected to gambling, which all of the industry wants to avoid. Malia, you also had a question.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a leading question. I think you might have numbers on how big part of the Swedish and the European industry this would affect.
But the European number I can help. So it's 10 to 11 billion market revenue with in-game currencies in Europe. And so question is, how would that be impacted by these key principles? So after discussions with companies, if they would be enforced in this hard way, how they are written now in these key principles, it might mean that certain companies might say it doesn't work anymore and kind of stop this kind of business model. So it is a threat.
And I can add that we are currently working on a report in Swedish about the issues and the effects of the Swedish industry, and I think we have around 85% of all the companies are, based on their revenues, are working with these types of business models, somewhere around that. So it has a lot of effect on the Swedish industry. Any other questions? Over there.
Yeah, my colleagues from Northwest might kill me afterwards. Well, are there any positive parts of this proposal? Are there any good parts of strengthening consumer protection within game purchases, or is everything bad?
What is good, and is to think about how can you get to an informed consumer at the end. So that's my personal opinion, that it should also be in the interest of the industry to have a well-informed consumer. I mean, a frustrated consumer that has the feeling, okay, he or she is feeling tricked by a game, also as a consumer that after a while will say, oh no, I don't like that anymore. I will either turn to another game or I will turn to another hobby. So this interest, or the ultimate goal of having a well-informed consumer, I think is a good one. And there you could, if you really want to find something good of this whole process, is that it kind of forces the industry to think about how a meaningful solution could look like to get there. But what is proposed right now by the CPC is just the wrong way. Yeah.
And I can add also that this is also based on experience for way back when I worked with marketing and in the early games of the mobile games development. It's very expensive to not have informed customers, because the hassle you have to get through with refunds and sorting everything out, you want system is made by informed choices, because it's better and easier for everyone. So that's, if it helps in that way, I think it's good. Any other questions? Yes.
Just one, because you mentioned that, the game industry in Europe struggling with a lot of these digital acts that you described. Are there also other sectors under this broad digital umbrella that also struggles with it, that you are in dialogue with or can join forces with? Or?
Yeah, so in Brussels we are of course in contact also with the other sectors, in particular also the creative industry, so the other creative industries. Video games is a creative industry, and then there are the others. But it's in general an issue for all companies that are trying something new for startups that want to innovate, that want to invest, and if they cannot fully focus on that, but have to deal now with all the regulatory things, it's a legit question to say, okay, is it really possible in Europe anymore to innovate? And also what that means also to find investment and to find the money here. Yeah? If you allow me, maybe I can close with telling a joke that I really like. It's not about video games, it's about AI. Yeah? And the joke is what is the difference when it comes to the development of AI between the US, China, and the EU? So the Chinese have the talent, the US has the capital, and Europe has the rules, but no talent and no capital. Yeah? And it's a simplification, but there is a grain of truth inside that only focusing too much on the rules is not the way, but you need to give companies breathing room, and that is not a video specific issue. That goes, to answer your question, for all sectors who want to innovate and grow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? I think that when you're talking about innovation, coming from the Swedish innovation system, I also think it's important to raise the question about what innovation is. And there's also a very strict view on that innovation should lead to a product now. But it could also be, we have a lot of knowledge in this area where the Oslo manual, for instance, points that it can also be innovation in business models. So this would be a really good case to change the view of innovation and also make it possible for innovative startups within the games industry to innovate in business model if we're allowed to use that kind of view on innovation.
And talking about AI, China, US and Europe, just recently there was a report saying that China is leading over the US in 57 out of 64 critical technologies, and then they're not even mentioning Europe. And personally, I'm not very fond of government grants to businesses because it can lead to strange, unfair competition and so forth. But China is investing really heavily, the government, in AI and businesses there, and then we have the results. So, yeah.
We need a more level play field in general, I think. So we are a bit over time, but I would like to say a big thank you to our excellent panel, and thank you for the great questions. So, and thank you to the audience. The next panel here today is at 2:30. 2:30, yes, and it's about
Children's rights and protection.
children's rights. Yes, barnrätt. Yeah. So thank you so much.